Yes,
Okay.
nice. It's perfect. It's a good look.
Yeah, especially with my computer screen reflected in them the entire time. That would be great.
Even better. Yeah, it's weird having this. I'm going to have a headache by the end of this because of the ring light in my face that I don't normally bother with. But when I tried putting my camera on, I was like, ooh, it's not that dark in here, but I look like I'm sitting in total darkness.
Like me
I'm really
normally.
not, but looks like it. What's that?
I said like me normally.
Yeah, like you normally.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of light, a little bit less light though, because I put up more soundproofing, and I have like a painting canvas that I have not used because it's kind of warped and not very good, and that usually kind of filters out some light and sound, but then I threw some extra soundproofing panels on top of it, so
nice.
It's a little darker in here, but not that dark. Yay! Hello! Can you hear us okay?
You can hear me, right? I can hear you. It's all good.
We can, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Super. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited.
Oh, yeah, absolute. Yes. What else do I have to do on a beautiful, what is it, Thursday? I'm good.
So disgusting.
So now, where are you guys? You guys are in Connecticut.
Today is a good day for being in... Yeah. I can block this out, Kathy. After graduating, I left the state a couple of times and then came back. Cool. But Kathy, you've been here the whole time, right?
Pretty much, except for that time we went to Australia, but that wasn't permanent. So
speaking of Australia, when we flew to Australia a couple of years after college, we were so excited to see you on a documentary on the plane as we were flying to Australia.
That is like wickedly bizarre. That's not. What's really bizarre is that's not the first time I've heard that. So I had a colleague who was flying to Germany, and there I was. And he said, here I am flying the plane, and damn it, there's Feder on the in-flight entertainment. Oh my God.
Well, we were delighted. We're like, it's Kenny. It's fate that this trip is going to work out okay, because there's Kenny letting us know.
I'd love to go to Australia. I've never been.
Oh, it was amazing, and we've been wanting to go back ever since. It was such a great time, and we were there for 5 months.
When did you guys graduate from CCNU? Wow.
So, isn't it crazy how none of us look any older than we did back then? I've noticed now that I'm seeing everybody. Like, we all look exactly the same as we did back then.
Back in I already looked 69, so it's a flat line after that. Technology.
Yeah, I was actually in your class on 9/11, and I remember you sending us all home that day to go be with our families. So that's another story I have with you, or of you, that I'm sure you don't remember, because again, I know it was a long time ago. But
wow,
that was a weird day.
But I remember that day because before class, one of the majors walked into my office before my 9:30 class, and he was kind of laughing because it was such an embarrassing thing. So some plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. And in my mind, I thought, some private plane, a 2-seater or whatever, went to class. And it wasn't until after that class ended that I got back, and everybody had the big screens in the classrooms in Loretto. They had the news on, and it was like, what the fuck? Oh my God. That day is kind of, and then, we had to cancel classes and everybody went home.
Yeah, I was in the middle of a genetics class in a genetics lab, actually, when my advisor came in and told the professor that what had happened and told us what happened. And we're like, well, that sounds horrible. And he's like, all right, well, I guess we'll finish our labs so that you can all go and figure out what's going on. And then I went to your class and you sent us home, which we appreciated. Our friend Colin, that we frequently talk about on this show, who's not on this show, was in that class too, actually. Yeah. Uplifting note to start the episode.
I remember when I got back to Loretto, and at that point classes had been canceled. I mean, after I canceled our class, the school canceled classes, and I remember a bunch of kids in one of the rooms watching the events transpire like live, and a student who was completely oblivious walked into the classroom expecting to have class there, and they said, no, the plane crashed into the World Trade Center, classes are canceled. And this person did a fist bump, like, yeah, all right. Because they only cared about the fact that classes had been canceled. Not that, maybe thousands of people had just been killed.
First part didn't register really, yeah. Yeah. Wow.
I guess, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So I have an introduction. Yeah. I have better memories too that I wanted to talk about later, but we've got an introduction for you.
Sure.
And then I sent you some of the questions that we're hoping to talk about. But like I said, it was just going to be more conversational. We like to do, and apparently our listeners also like, when we try to just like complain about all the really bad science and bad history lessons and stuff that they give on the show. So because one of the characters is an archaeologist, that's why we're like, all right, well, let's get an actual archaeologist on here to get his perspective on what archaeology is really like compared to what this character portrays archaeology as.
All right.
So I'll go ahead and read the...
You're both frozen. Screens are frozen.
Okay.
Who? Oh.
All right.
I'm here.
Okay. It froze for a second. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, the stick, it keeps kicking in and kicking out, but we can do the best we can. I'm used to that.
Yeah, that is fine. All right. So I'll do our intro here. If you want me to change anything after I've read it, I can edit it a little bit later on. So our guest today is Dr. Kenneth Feder. He's professor of archaeology at Central Connecticut State University. His primary research interests include archaeology of the native peoples of New England and the analysis of public perception about the human past. He's the founder and director of the Farmington Archaeological Project, an ongoing investigation of the prehistory of the Farmington River Valley. And he's the author and co-author of several books, a few of which I've mentioned on our podcast before, and is a frequent guest on podcasts and documentaries. Kathy and I, however, would argue that his most important role has been teaching archaeology to undergrads such as ourselves way back in the day, and also teaching the Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries class that I took as well. So welcome to the show. We're very excited to have you here.
Hey, thank you so much for inviting me. You'll notice I never know exactly where I'm supposed to be looking.
Oh, that's fine.
The camera's over there. So if I look there, though, but I'm not like talking to you guys. So if it looks weird, it's because I am weird, and that's just the way it goes. But it's just amazing to run into ex-students. It's amazing to run into ex-students. I mean, sometimes you recognize them, sometimes you don't, who tell all these stories, all of which, by the way, I want your listeners to understand. I deny anything they've ever said, and I'm not even sure what they've said, but I deny it. I think that's...
I only talked about how much I love your book.
Oh, then that's okay.
I said how much I love your book, and it helped me when I was traveling.
That's awesome. That's really great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of what I do these days is outreach to people and say, hey, look, there are these cool places that you can go and visit for yourself. And that's like, I'm psyched about that. In the middle of another book about that. So
awesome.
But so
I'm sure I'll be buying that one too.
So what are we talking about today? There you go.
So let's see what is first on our questions. Let me pull that back up here. All right. So as we said, one of the main characters is...
They sent me... I was just saying that you guys sent me questions, and I promise, I swear, I glanced at them. And then I figured, you know what? Let's just talk.
They're not hard questions, so no worries. Yeah. So one of the...
As long as you're not asking me what the capital of South Dakota is.
Absolutely not, I don't know that either. So as we said...
It ain't Bismarck. That's North Dakota.
That's North Dakota. Okay.
Dakota be? I don't know. I've never been to the Dakotas.
If it reads Pierre, but they pronounce it Pier.
Oh, weird.
Pierre,
okay.
North Dakota.
Oh.
And that's from watching a lot of episodes of Where in the World was Carmen Sandiego.
I used to love that show. It was such a good show. And the game. The game was great too.
Yeah.
My favorite things.
Yeah, it was an awesome show.
I was always way worse at the game than my sister was because she was 2 years older than me, and I was always really jealous about how much farther she could get in the game than I could. I mean, she still is 2 years older than me, but back then it bothered me a lot more.
Percentage-wise, you're a lot closer now than you were back then.
Very true.
That's
2 years
that's
makes
a mathematical
way less
argument.
difference now.
Oh, yeah.
So, as we mentioned, one of the main characters in the show is an archaeologist, and we often joke about him because he apparently knows all ancient languages fluently, can read and write like every single ancient language that they come across. He doesn't actually do any real digging at any sites. He just visits all of these different alien worlds and helps them to talk to the locals who all speak in English anyway. So we're guessing that's not what real archaeology is like. Would you like to explain to our listeners what
It's
archaeology
close,
is?
but not quite. Not quite. Yeah. I mean, the bit about languages is interesting. I think, wasn't it? I believe on Star Trek, their kind of blanket explanation was that they had a universal translator that was always on translating.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that at least they said, okay, here's a technological fix for that. I mean, the truth of the matter is there are people who are wonderful with languages and know a lot of languages, but it tends to be they know languages within the same language group. My dad was just brilliant with language, but we're talking about Romance languages. So he could speak French and Italian and Spanish and German and of course English. That's all more or less within the same group.
Mm-hmm.
But he was rubbish with Chinese or Japanese or languages that are not in that group in Western Europe. He had no knowledge of whatsoever. Towards the end of his life, he actually learned Egyptian hieroglyphs. And I showed him some Maya hieroglyphs from Mesoamerica, from the great Maya civilization. And I said, your knowledge of hieroglyphs, Egyptian hieroglyphs, does it help you all with Maya? And he said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no connection. So there's no way that knowing one is going to help you with the other. So realistically, the possibility that one person is going to know languages in each of these very, very separate and completely wholly disconnected language groups is, well, it's highly unlikely. I like the universal translator thing a lot better, I guess.
That does work a lot better. And unfortunately, they don't have one. They just say that everybody speaks both a foreign language and English, even though they've never actually met people from Earth before. So it's just a bizarre concept.
Well, that's interesting. So
yeah. I mean, it makes it easy.
Especially
it makes it easy for them to do the TV show, so you don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. We actually joke too because this character lived on a planet that was based on ancient Egyptian society, and when he came back a year later, he had taught everybody English rather than just speaking their language. So it's a weird show.
Well, that made it easier for the viewers of the show, but not realistic.
Yes.
Well, I think a lot of science fiction, you have to make those compromises, or it just, you're going to be spending all your time with these technical difficulties.
Very true. And we know realistically, like, they can't possibly cast a different character for all the roles that they have these people portraying, but it's still fun to make fun of them when they're doing like a bunch of different things that have nothing to do with what their title is supposed to actually be. Like the theoretical astrophysicist who's also an expert in like the human immune system and stuff like that. Just as a biologist myself and someone that teaches A&P, like, I don't know anything about astrophysics, let alone regular physics. So I can't imagine she knows as much about all science as she supposedly does.
We know that the funny thing about that is if you're on Twitter enough, the application of that now is that you'll have people saying, well, I'm a scientist and I don't trust these vaccines. And you look at their background, the guy's an engineer.
Right.
You have a
valid
background in
science,
but that doesn't mean you know hell about immunology or virology or vaccine manufacturing or testing. Just because you have the PhD or whatever after your name doesn't make you an expert in every science.
Exactly. And I think that's a common misnomer too that I'm frequently telling my students about, like a certain famous on TV doctor who is actually a cardiothoracic surgeon, but loves to give all of this advice about miracle cures for weight loss and cancer curing. And you probably know who I'm talking about, but he doesn't have any qualifications to talk about any of that stuff. And when I was a personal trainer, all of my clients would be telling me about this miracle diet or weight loss thing that he had talked about. So they didn't need my help anymore with exercise. They were just going to do his miracle cure instead. And it obviously never ended well.
There's some guy on TV now hawking, I recognize, who will remain nameless, who's hawking some stuff for muscle pain. And I think he's a psychologist. Well, if your muscle pains are all psychological, that's fine. But otherwise, the guy does as much as I do, and I'm an archaeologist about how to cure muscle pain.
Right. Yeah. Some pain is psychosomatic. Most of it's not. So he doesn't necessarily know a whole lot about that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Speaking of different specialties, they frequently refer to this character Daniel as either an archaeologist or an anthropologist. They tend to use the two terms interchangeably, but they do have different definitions. So would you mind clarifying for our listeners what the real difference is between those two terms?
Yeah. The funny thing is, because I've done some TV and podcasts, and I get blowback from people who believe that the pyramids were built by the Egyptian pyramids were built by guys from outer space or whatever, or lost continent of Atlantis. And I actually got this long, very nasty email from this person saying, and you say all these things about archaeology, but you're not even an archaeologist. It says right here, you're in the Department of Anthropology. And it was like, oh man, do you not understand how this works? In America, anyway, virtually, I would say 95% of archaeologists working in the New World have degrees in anthropology, because historically, archaeology has been subsumed within the departments of anthropology. The reason for that is we got Europeans coming to the New World, colonizing, encountering native people. And so the big questions are, who are these native people? And unfortunately, how can we subjugate them? Can we exploit them? And if you want to know about the native people, well, that's anthropology. But if you want to know about the native people's past, well, that's archaeology. So let's put them both together so that archaeologists, all archaeologists, 95% in the New World, are anthropologists. Not all anthropologists are archaeologists. It's that kind of a deal. So there's cultural anthropologists and social anthropologists and physical or biological anthropologists and linguistic anthropologists. And archaeology is the part of anthropology in the New World that focuses on the physical remains, the material remains left behind by the people in the past. That's not 100%, especially in Europe, there are archaeologists who are in classics departments or in history departments. And so it is different elsewhere. But in America, you call somebody an archaeologist, you can almost always take it for granted that their background is in anthropology, and it's one of, used to be 4 subfields in anthropology: cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, linguistics, and archaeology. So again, archaeologists are anthropologists, not all anthropologists are archaeologists.
Thank you. Yeah, awesome. I love,
by the way,
archaeology and
anthropology. The guy who
Go ahead.
criticized me for not being an archaeologist, but I was an anthropologist, it was amazing how angry he was, simply because I was talking on I spoke on a TV show and said, no, actually Egyptians are capable of building pyramids. They didn't need help from extraterrestrials. And
premise of the show ruined. Oh no.
Like that. It's just like, I don't know. But I do get a lot of emails, a lot of angry people out there, who do you guys bleep stuff out? Because you can bleep this out. When people
you can swear all you want on this show.
Me directly about,
we swear all the fucking time.
Here's the deal. I have a cardinal. There you go. Yes, I have a cardinal rule, which is if I get an email and in the subject line it says shithead, asshole, or motherfucker, I don't respond, because they're not looking for a dialogue. It's not like, oh, you think I'm a motherfucker? Why don't we talk about this? I mean, no. Obviously, that's just so that the person can vent. But it's when people say, listen, Feder, I think you're deluded, or I think you're wrong because blah, blah, blah. Then, okay, then it's open for a conversation.
Yeah, some people just kind of immediately go on the attack and are expecting no response, don't expect you to have a response. And then when you do, they're kind of shocked. I've noticed that in my line of work too. Like, I won't go into too much detail because that's not what we're here to talk about. But working in fitness, there's so much pseudoscience, and I would get so many angry people being like, why can't I do this special diet? Why are you telling me I shouldn't do this? Why do you think you know better about exercise than my friend who's a bodybuilder? I'm like, because you're not a bodybuilder and you have completely different goals. So that's why. But yeah, I can for sure relate. It's so frustrating.
Did you hear the the recording that Arnold Schwarzenegger gave about the vaccine, it actually was really good. He said, look,
surprisingly,
if you want to know about biceps, ask me. I'm a bodybuilder. But if you want to know about vaccines, listen to Dr. Fauci. He knows what he's talking about.
Exactly.
I thought that was pretty cool of him to say, hey, look, I have this very narrow expertise. You want to know about that? Ask me. But the rest of this other stuff, find the experts. Find the people who know what, who have studied this all their lives and who have worked in that field. Yes. And expertise means something too, you know?
I respect these people that say that they want to do their own research, but the reason that we have specialists is because the real research takes years and years of background education to comprehend some of the more nuanced modern things that we're learning about. So you can't expect as a layperson to understand everything about all the anatomy and physiology and microbiology and biochemistry that's involved in a vaccine if you don't have these years and years of background research. That's not to say that somebody's not smart, but that's why we have specialists. That's why we have doctors, because we can't all be experts on everything.
Yeah. And you really
except for Daniel Jackson and also Captain Dr. Samantha Dr. Carter.
Yeah.
They are the two experts on everything.
I was going to say, you can't include in the category of research, you can't include, I read a Wikipedia article or I saw a YouTube. Those may be places where you can start, but man, you got to go back to like original sources. And if you're not, if you don't want to read the medical literature, you got to learn a lot about the medical terminology before you can read that and understand it. But that's what it takes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually something I talk to my students a lot about too, because we also go not over just about the science topics we're covering, but also science skills and like how you can know a good source from a bad one and how you can differentiate between real science and pseudoscience. Because I think unfortunately, a lot of science classes are missing that, which is why I make sure to include it in all of mine, no matter what subject I'm teaching.
That's great. Absolutely.
So, what else do I have for questions?
More questions.
Let me see. More questions. Actually, speaking of ancient aliens, this entire show is based on the premise that ancient aliens were a thing. So first of all, how do we know that actually is not at all true? Right. And what is the harm of people trying to say that we needed those ancient aliens to help us get where we are today?
I know this is about this Stargate thing, but are either of you guys into Star Trek?
Yes.
The original.
That's what got us into sci-fi to begin with.
Well, I'm wearing my isolinear chip earrings.
Woo! There you go. Now, this is really specific. Do you remember an episode called "Who Mourns for Adonis"?
If you don't, familiar.
It's really
I don't know titles very well. I'll probably know it.
Here's
if you explain it.
All right. So this was the second year of the original series, and it starts with the Enterprise is somewhere in outer space, and a giant human hand. It looks like an actual hand grabs the Enterprise, and of course the people on board don't know what the hell's going on, and everybody on the flight deck, Kirk and Sulu and a bunch of these other people, Bones and McCoy, all beam onto this planet that looks like ancient Greece. There are columns and all, and they encounter this giant guy who's Apollo. He's the Greek god Apollo. And he says that I've been watching you people for a long time and you're finally ready, blah, 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 blah. And at one point, when he's not listening and Kirk and McCoy and Bones are talking about this, Kirk actually brings up the following scenario, which is maybe 5,000 years ago in the Mediterranean, this extraterrestrial species showed up on Earth. And the things that they were capable of technologically seemed so powerful and magical that the people imbued those aliens with God. They interpreted them as gods. So that the Greek god Apollo actually wasn't a god. He was an extraterrestrial alien whose technology gave him so much power. There's the old Arthur Clarke quote that I'm going to mangle, which is any sufficiently advanced technology will appear to be magic to people who aren't familiar with that technology.
Right, yeah.
And so here's Star Trek essentially arguing the ancient astronauts hypothesis that, yeah, I mean, if ancient aliens landed on Earth thousands of years ago, their technology would be so advanced that the people of Earth might interpret those folks as being gods. And so today we can learn about those ancient aliens by looking at ancient religions. And, you know, that's a part of what Eric von Däniken and George Tsoukalos have always said. That is, the stories of the gods are actually stories of aliens who landed on Earth.
Right. So that's exactly the premise of this show. The thing
is, so this, it's not a new thing. It's not a new deal. This is something that's been going, that has been at least considered by lots of other people and incorporated into fiction, of course. Now, Star Trek is a documentary, by the way. It's not fiction. That all that stuff really happened, right?
Oh no, we lost Kenny.
Oh,
Kenny.
That's what I think.
Okay. We lost you for a second.
Everything's frozen, but I'll keep.
That's all right.
Yeah, well, I'm back.
Yay.
You guys back? I'm back.
You're back.
The fundamental underpinning assumption in so much of ancient aliens, ancient astronauts, is the notion that human beings, that the archaeological record reflects technologies that were far beyond the capability of primitive ancient people to have concocted all by themselves. That's why I talk about in my frauds book, which is Oxford University Press, you can get it on Amazon. I talk about that notion.
Great book.
Is sort of like the ancient aliens were an extraterrestrial Peace Corps. There you go, frauds, myths, and mysteries.
Wow.
So it's this idea that ancient human beings were backwards and primitive and not terribly bright. But the Peace Corps arrives, these aliens, they say, you know what, folks, we're going to teach you agriculture and architecture and math and calendars and writing systems and metallurgy and on and on and on. And that's going to shoot you ahead in terms of evolution, cultural evolution, by millennia. And so people look at the pyramids of Egypt. They look at the Maya calendar. They look at the amazing agricultural productivity of even the earliest agriculturalists 10,000 years ago. Say, I don't think human beings could have on their own developed those technologies and skills. They must have a source from somewhere else. You know, that's always been a problem in archaeology and in history. This notion that, well, and not as extreme. Maybe, well, most people are like that, but the Greeks weren't. So everybody learned from the Greeks. Or most people were dull and uninventive, but Egyptians, no, they figured it all out, and their ideas spread everywhere. Even the Atlantis story, which is completely made up by Plato, there's no truth or validity to it. It's made up. It's a great story. It's a great tale. But he made it up for a purpose and practically tells us that he made it up. Mm-hmm. But anyway, and please, dear God, nobody email me saying, yeah, but Plato said it was a real story. Hell, he did not. A character in a dialogue, he put the words in that person's mouth. But I mean, that's the equivalent of saying, if you watch the old All in the Family, Archie Bunker was this racist, homophobe, misogynist. That show was produced by some of the most liberal and progressive people in all of Hollywood. They didn't believe that. They put those words in the mouths of a character. That's what Plato did. But the idea here, again, with Atlantis, at least as it evolved, was, well, most people are dull and inventive, and how did people all over the world figure out agriculture and writing and mathematics? It must be they got it from Atlantis. Atlantis was the source. The term that's used in both in history and cultural geography and archaeology is diffusionism. That is the claim that really very few people are very smart, and that their great genius then moves out or diffuses to the rest of the world. And we categorically know that's not true, because in the archaeological record of lots of places, we see the very, very predictable kind of steps, one on top of the other, this slow evolution of these skills and development. You look at ancient Egypt, Egyptians didn't one day get like blueprints for building pyramids, right?
Okay.
Egyptians slowly, over hundreds of years, began putting rocks together, piling them up, and making mistakes. The archaeological record is filled with trial and error. These technologies don't appear overnight. They appear over a very long period of time, and there's clear evidence of steps and starts, trial and error, terrible mistakes. It was probably 100 years between the very first pyramid and the Great Pyramid, the big one that's over 400 feet tall. That's the Pharaoh Khufu's burial chamber. And we can see collapsed pyramids. We can see pyramids that are bent, pyramids where the angles are all wrong. And it was back to the drawing board. Okay, we made a mistake. Let's make the angle less severe. Let's use, instead of bricks, let's use rocks. So that's slow. That's not what you would expect at all if this technology was brought in wholesale. Okay, Egyptians, we're going to teach you to build pyramids. One of my favorites is, if you guys are familiar with the Nazca lines. This is in South America, way high up in the Altiplano, up way high elevation. And there are these lines etched in the desert.
It's on my bucket list to go to.
Animals. Like, oh my God, right? Spiders and monkeys. And you'll hear people say, people couldn't have done that because you would have needed technology to bring you up in the air to look down on the ground. Otherwise, you couldn't have done that. Well, I think before you even deal with that, my first question is, wait a minute. So extraterrestrial aliens who have beat the whole speed of light thing, so they can travel across the universe, they come to Earth, and what do they teach people to do? To etch giant monkeys in the desert of South America? What in the world is that about? It's just... when you look at these things in any kind of depth, they just don't make any sense. And we don't need aliens teaching people how to do stuff, because the archaeological record shows really clearly people are smart, people figure stuff out, and people are fully capable of experimenting and learning from their mistakes and being better the next time, which is what the archaeological record shows with virtually every technology.
I visited the Serpent Mounds recently. Speaking of that, reminded me of the fact that I went to the Serpent Mounds, and in your Archaeological Oddities book, you had said something really similar, like, why would these people that came all the way here from outer space build mounds that look like a snake, which is an earth creature, in order to give themselves some place to land, when you, as you said, people in that area were already building mounds at that point in time. And I actually visited a bunch of the other mounds that were out there.
Ohio is an incredibly cool place. When I first went to Ohio, I was teaching at Central, and it was like spring break. And I was going to Ohio to see these incredible Native American mounds. And of course, students of mine were like, they were going to Virginia Beach, and they were going to Disney World. And they said, Dr. Feder, where are you going? Most of them called me Kenny, which is great. I said, Kenny, where are you going for spring break? And I said, Ohio. And they kind of looked at me with pity. Oh, do you have to go there? Do you have like relatives there? Oh, no, I'm doing this. It's my choice. And I think they thought I was totally demented. But yes, Ohio, the Midwest, is great for these mounds. And again, in the case of these mounds, we see a very nice sequence of smaller, going to bigger, going to more elaborate, more complex, requiring more labor, because that's how human beings develop technology. They come up with a cool idea and they experiment. I tell my students, I have in class shown students, I've stopped doing it, a picture of a series of iPods when everybody had an iPod, and looking at the first iPod, which was like a 40 gigabyte little physical hard drive with a little black and white screen. And again, that was over a series of years. When the technology got better, they replaced the physical drive with a solid state drive. There was a color screen. That screen got bigger. The amount of memory, the number of songs you could hold got larger and larger. I said, yeah, that's how technology works today. It's how it worked thousands of years ago.
Exactly. They weren't any less smart than we are now. They just didn't have the same technology to build upon that we have. And the reason we have technology that we have is because we built on the technology that they developed. They were just as smart as we were, but I think a lot of people don't like to give them that credit.
Yeah, I think actually there's an argument that can be made that people, that anatomically modern human beings who've been around for a couple of hundred, maybe 300,000 years, that in the past had to be more clever than we have to be today, because they had to figure stuff out, as opposed to, well, I'll call the Geek Squad at Blockbuster and they can solve it. I mean, there was no Geek Squad when you were trying to figure out how to haft that spear onto that shaft. You either did it successfully or you didn't eat that day. And so the motivation to improve technology and the pressure to do that probably was greater in the past. And their brains are anatomically, we're looking again at maybe 300,000 years now, brains that look just like ours.
Yeah,
that if you did an MRI, you brought one of these guys into the present, did an MRI, that you wouldn't notice anything different about their brain than you would if you did it to a modern human being.
What is my next question? Actually, this one is a request from our friend Colin. And it actually kind of has to do with what we were talking about before, because we've been saying that it's important to get the right specialist to do the right thing. So do you mind sharing your story with us about what happened when the dinosaur footprints were discovered at West Farms Mall and you were being contacted as an archaeologist to comment on something that was supposed to be commented on, that they should have been contacting by a paleontologist for?
Yeah, it's a great story. It's years and years and years ago. So the context is, I do an archaeology field school. I have done almost every summer, every other summer. And very often, very frequently, for like a human interest story, our dig would get covered by the newspaper or by television news. So they'd send somebody out there, they'd film us showing, the kinds of artifacts you're finding, all good fun. And so one summer, there was a guy from the Hartford Courant who followed me around for a couple of days and wrote a really nice piece about the archaeology that we were doing in the Farmington River Archaeological Project. And so now, we part ways. Months later, I get a call from this guy, and he tells me, Kenny, I need your expertise. I'm on deadline here, and it was later in the day, but he needed a story for the next day. He said, and you're in my Rolodex. At that point, it probably was a Rolodex, as the guy who knows about old stuff. And he told me that it was West Farms Mall, which is in Farmington and West Hartford and Newington. So it's a big mall. And they're next door to West Farms Mall, they were building another plaza. And they found dinosaur footprints. The Courant found out about it. And they told this guy, well, that archaeology guy, ask him for a quote, And so he called me and I said, look, here's the deal. Archaeology is the study of the material remains of human beings. Human beings and dinosaurs are separated by 65 million years. The last of the dinosaurs died off 65 million years ago. And so the person you would like to talk to is not an archaeologist, but a paleontologist, or even a geologist would probably be much more fluent about this stuff than I am. And his response was, yeah, but you study the past. I go, well, yeah, lots of people study the past. Archaeologists study the past. Historians study the past. Geologists. But I don't know about dinosaurs. When I was a kid growing up, loved dinosaurs. Loved the dinosaurs. Loved me some dinosaurs. I actually tracked down a photograph of me when I was 6 years old, 1958, in front of the big Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. So there's little Kenny, this tall, just posed in front of the dinosaur. So I've always loved dinosaurs. But I was trying to explain this guy.
Yeah, they're great. I love them too.
Here's a phone number of the state geologist. Call him. He'll give you a much more nuanced and intelligent response. And the guy said, this is one of those instances in which I should have stuck to my guns, but I didn't. He said, Kenny, you're my only option here. Give me something I can go with. And I literally just said, oh, come on. Yeah, dinosaur footprints, they're really neat. Yeah, they're great. They're wonderful. and yeah, you can learn a lot about, dinosaurs walking. You can learn a lot about their feet. But please, dear God, find an expert. He said, thank you very much, Kenny. And God damn it, the next day in the newspaper, I'm quoted. As Archaeologist Kenneth Feder says about the dinosaur footprints, that's real. They're really neat. I said, oh my God. State geologist ran into me like 6 months later. He put his arm on my shoulder and said, Kenny, so any neat stories about dinosaur footprints lately? I said, I swear, I told the guy to call you. I don't know. But the funny thing is, I will still see, I'm on Twitter a bunch, and I will still see archaeologists posting pictures of kids' toys or cartoons or God knows what else, in which archaeologists are studying dinosaurs. And it's like, dinosaurs are neat, but please, I don't, they're big. How's that? That's my expertise. But it still is a point where archaeology and paleontology sort of get mixed up all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I had one more question here, at least. And then Kathy has a question for sure.
You don't have a question?
Yes, you do. I'll ask your question.
No, I really don't.
Well, a question I wanted to ask, but you've actually kind of already answered it, is if there's any sci-fi, because I know you said you don't watch Stargate, and I was going to ask if there's any sci-fi that you really do love. So it sounds like you're a big Star Trek fan like we are. Are there any other kinds of sci-fi that you're really into?
Yeah. I'm going to be honest with you. If I put on my science hat and just look at Star Trek from an objective perspective, it's not really very good. I'm sorry.
It's not, but we still love it.
But I enjoyed it. Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with, man, what was it? How old was I when it started? Like 10 or 11, and so I have this great nostalgia for it. So I love Star Trek. You know what? Maybe you guys are you guys brown shirts? I am a huge Firefly fan.
I do like Firefly. I'm actually not as big of a fan of it as Kathy. I've only seen it like once all the way through. But
Kathy, you and me, man. I think it's amazing because it's so contrary to expectation. It's a Western, but it's a Western in outer space. Yeah. So, and I love all the characters. Loved Firefly. Love me some Firefly. I mean, Star Wars, again, it's a space opera. The stories are not spectacular, really. And, Star Wars is one of those things. It's a peeve I have when movies or books have sequels where clearly the person wasn't expecting to make a sequel. And so now they kind of have to back engineer parts of the story. Like, I'm sorry, folks, if you watch the originally released Star Wars, there's no freaking way Darth Vader is Luke's father. He's not. But since they decided later on, we're going to make it that way. Okay, yeah. Well,
and they clearly were not meant to be siblings in the first movie either.
No.
They just kind of passionately, don't they, at one point?
So the original...
And we're supposed to go back and watch it and go, ew, that's your sister.
Yeah.
I'm saying, are we supposed to go back and watch that where they kiss? And go, oh, that's your brother, that's your sister. But yeah, cool. I like it. Fine. I like it good enough. What I liked a lot was although it wasn't quite true to Asimov's stories, I liked I, Robot with Will Smith. I thought that was a great movie. Okay. I genuinely enjoy science fiction and fantasy. Ursula Le Guin. Are you guys familiar with Ursula Le Guin?
Mm-mm.
A little bit.
Here's the deal, and this is for all you young anthropologists out there. Ursula Le Guin was the daughter of Alfred and Theodora Kroeber, who were like the founders of American anthropology. Oh. So when Ursula Le Guin was a little girl, she grew up on like the Navajo reservation because her dad was doing research there. She grew up in a number of Native American, I believe she spent a bunch of time on a bunch of reservations. And I think that really informed her science fiction because, in other words, she was familiar with alien cultures, alien from a Western American perspective. And there's a lot of that in her writing. For everybody out there, it's a great book, but if you don't want to read the book, there's an old PBS version, dramatization of the book. It's called The Lathe of Heaven, and it's amazing. It is, and it's by Ursula Le Guin, and it's an amazing story. Please, Mary, Kathy, take 40 minutes out of your day and find on YouTube the PBS 1980. It's PBS. It's the original dramatization of The Lathe of Heaven, and it's no spoilers here, but it's about a guy who figures out he dreams effectively, so that when he goes to sleep at night and dreams, what he dreams, it's not just that it becomes true the next day, it's that the world changes, but nobody else knows it. For them, the world has always been that way. And a psychiatrist with power-hungry psychiatrist decides that he finally is convinced that that it's real. That this guy, that when this guy goes to sleep at night, everybody goes to sleep, they wake up, the next day, the world is different, but he's the only one who knows it. He knows he dreamt that. And the psychiatrist decides he's going to have him alter the world to make him wealthy and powerful. It's a really cool idea.
Interesting.
And she's, I love stuff. The word for world is forest. Did you guys, was that movie Avatar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually we were just really cool reviewing an episode that has almost the same plot as Avatar, even though it actually came out years before Avatar did.
Yeah. Well, if you read The Word for World is Forest by Ursula Le Guin, the people who wrote the script for Avatar must have read that book, because there's some key stuff in there that really sounds very familiar. And again, that's Le Guin. She's great. Loved her stuff. And there are a couple of interviews I've seen of her. She's just a brilliant woman, a great writer. And, and for my money, Bradbury and Asimov and Arthur Clarke. Yeah, I loved all those guys.
Awesome. A lot of our fans are Star Trek fans. So on their behalf, I do have to ask if you could clarify your statement about Star Trek not being very good. Did you just mean the original series, which I would agree with, or did you mean anything more recent than that? Again, I'm just asking for our Star Trek
fans.
No,
I'm talking about the original. It's the original series that if you really look at,
I love it because of the nostalgia, but it's bad.
The roles of women. Yeah, I mean, Kirk is like a dick, and women are clearly. Come on, man. We've got this hugely advanced culture, and these women are still like 1950s or something in terms of their roles. So yeah, it got. Isn't that's? I'm going to misstate this. Maybe you guys can clarify it. That in the original idea for Star Trek, and maybe in the pilot, the captain's number 2 was a woman.
I've only seen the pilot once. I don't remember. That actually might be the case.
I think that's true. And they're doing
she is a woman in the remake.
Star Trek is also going to be a woman.
Right.
Yeah. They've made so many extra. Like there's a ton of new Star Trek coming out now too, which I really love the new stuff. And I love all the other series, TNG and wow, my brain, Voyager. There we go. Also, Voyager. But I think pretty much everything is better than the original series.
I have this amazing, this very nostalgic memory when I was in grad school at UConn in the mid 1970s, and I'd go out on a dig and be gone all day, and I'd return home in the evening to this complex. It was really crappy apartments that was lived in by all grad students, and there was no air conditioning, so everybody had their windows open. And on some channel, and it was reruns. If you pulled into the parking lot at exactly the right time, you would hear the opening theme to the original Star Trek echoing through the complex, because everybody had their windows open, and it was like, because it was a big complex, it was actually because of the speed of sound is not instant. You would hear it like echoing across the opening monologue and the music. I'm home. Star Trek is on. So don't get me wrong. Love the original, but, it is not great science fiction. One of the reasons for that, by the way, is that they didn't have, it's not like in the Twilight Zone, Serling had a set, like a stable of really good writers who were constantly feeding him stories. My understanding with Star Trek is a lot of that stuff was just spec. People who really weren't great authors and weren't heavy into sci-fi, didn't have a big background in sci-fi, would just submit stuff and they go, yeah, that's a great story. And then there's the whole story of Harlan Ellison, who is a really strange guy, hard guy to understand, but a brilliant writer. Did the one City on the Edge of Forever, in which, what is it? Kirk falls in love with a woman who's got to die, or the Nazis will actually
she's
will
like destined.
prevail.
Yeah, she's destined to die. They have to let her
Ellison.
die, or else it messes with the timeline. Yeah,
right. And although Harlan Ellison sued them because he wasn't happy with the changes they made to fit it into like a 1 hour episode, I mean, he's a brilliant writer. So it wasn't universally terrible, but there were a lot of stories where you just go, oh, come on. It was too 1950s, 1960s politics for, the 22nd century or whatever it's supposed to be. But but I'll still, Star Trek, I have the entire set of DVDs in little cases, each set of however many DVDs in little cases that look like the Star Trek emblem. And can you see my shirt, damn it? Wait a minute. That's all Star Trek. Various
awesome.
Ships.
Kathy's also got a Star Trek shirt on. I'm left out over here.
I do.
So if I tell you that Star Trek is bad, I'm just being a hypocrite. So pay no attention to me. Pay no attention to the man behind the Star Trek shirt.
So Kathy's question, the last question that I have, is she would like to know why 2 decades or so ago she got a B on her final archaeology paper instead of an A.
Kathy, you want to know why you got a
cheek question? Yes.
You want? No. I'll be honest because I remember it completely. I remember everybody. You got a B because I was feeling super generous that day. Because really, it was like a C-. You should know better than to ask me that question.
That's a great answer.
Sorry, Kat. By the way, that's not true. I don't remember why she got a B. So.
I barely even remember.
I've mentioned that I barely remember my students from like 1 or 2 semesters ago, let alone many years ago. So I didn't expect that you would remember either of us, and definitely not why any of us got any of the grades we did.
No. It was not a genuine question. It was
it was a joke. My answer was a joke. It's all good. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Because now I got to go back into the records and see what the hell is she bitching about. Yeah. I can still change that grade, Kathy. I think I can.
Ooh.
Oh, good. It's going to have a huge impact on my
I bet
future,
you get a raise now.
No kidding, right? So, it goes on your permanent record.
Yes.
I actually remember that final project myself. I'll share my story about it because this is my last fun story that I wanted to share. That was the cemetery project, and my aunt was actually was actually on the board of directors for a particular cemetery in the town where a lot of my family members lived for many generations, and she took me on a tour through that cemetery, and that's what I did for that project. And so it was a really special day with my aunt, learning a lot about my family that I hadn't known before. And so if you hadn't assigned that project, I wouldn't have had that opportunity, or probably wouldn't have even done that with her ever. And it's a great memory that I have. She was a wonderful person, and unfortunately she passed away a couple of years ago. But now she's joined all my other ancestors in that same cemetery. So that's just a really special memory that I have now. And I thank you for that, actually.
You're welcome. That I did that project. I've done that project forever. And usually at the first people go, why are we going into an old cemetery? And I said, look, gravestones are artifacts, and we can study them the way we study spear points or pots. Only we also have writing. We can read what's on those. And it's amazing how many people at the end of the project say, at first I thought, oh God. And I thought, there's some really interesting stuff there. This is my worst story, but I did not succumb to my usual terrible sense of humor. I had a kid. It was the end of the semester, and they hadn't gone to a cemetery yet, and they were planning like that weekend to go. But in fact, it was like his great aunt had died, and he had to go to the funeral. And in the back of my mind, I'm going to say, well, 2 birds with 1 stone. Go to your aunt's funeral and walk around, take some data. I did not suggest that, though. That would have been, I think, rude.
My might have been a little bit.
But to this day,
but it would have made sense.
To this day, I will still drive around and say, "Oh, an old cemetery," and I'll stop and walk around. And it's always with respect. This is a respectful visit. That those folks are there. They're ignored unless somebody comes and reads their story. Those are biographies of people who that's in many cases, that's all you're ever going to know about that person is what it says on their gravestone, who they were and who loved them and what their philosophy was and who they were married to or who their kids were or who their parents were. And it's revelatory and you see 4 kids in one family who all died in the same year from the same disease. And it's you tell students, hey, look, we have had pandemics and epidemics before, and look at what happened because we didn't have the technology to respond to that. We didn't have the medical technology. And look, people losing their entire family over a very short period of time. Just be grateful and be thankful that we've got really good epidemiologists and virologists and medical scientists and doctors who, man, at lightning speed, developed this vaccine. And I've got on my calendar right now shot number 3 in November.
Yay!
Because I don't want that. I don't want it.
No, vaccines are great. Everyone should get vaccines. Everyone knows my opinion on our podcast. Everyone knows my opinion on vaccines. I tell everyone my opinion on vaccines. They're great. Everyone should get them, unless you talk to your doctor and they have a reason not to, which is incredibly rare.
Right.
Yes.
That was all the questions that we had.
Recently saw.
Oh, go ahead.
I saw a meme recently on Twitter, and it was a shot of what is it called? Out of context Star Trek. And there's
I love that.
Kirk with his shirt ripped, and there's Bones giving him a vaccine, saying, "Get your damn vaccine." And I thought, well, if that helps anybody over that hump, golden.
Absolutely. I very much agree. Yeah. Kathy, did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
I know you said Atlantis doesn't exist, but have you considered that it is a city-sized spaceship in a different galaxy under the sea?
That's a good question.
That started on Earth.
I've never actually considered that.
You might have just changed his life by asking that.
Remember that bee I gave you on that project? I'm gonna have to go back and look at that real careful.
It's basically the premise of the second Stargate series, Atlantis is called, so that's why I ask. But
I'm really okay with the fact that the story that Plato wrote 2,400 years ago, or whatever it is, has inspired people. So that's a cool idea. What if there were this super sophisticated, very powerful, very wealthy civilization out there? What would if it had been in the past or in the future or another planet? What would that mean? What would that be? Can I give you my Atlantis Star Wars analogy?
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. So here's the deal. So I walk into class. This is probably after you guys graduated. So I walk into class. I say, look, everybody, I'm going to tell you a story. A long time ago, far away, a great and very powerful empire developed. And they were economically very wealthy. They were militarily very powerful and technologically extremely sophisticated. And they had in their minds the desire to control the universe that they knew about. And there was only one thing standing in their way, and that was a small ragtag group of people who were not economically wealthy, who were not militarily powerful, who were not technologically sophisticated, but they had something more important going for them. They had goodness and righteousness. They were living a good life. They had, I don't know, what we call it? They had like some force behind them. And I asked students, what is that story? And they go, well, that's Star Wars. And I go, I wasn't talking about Star Wars at all. That's the story that Plato tells about Atlantis. Atlantis is the evil empire. Ancient Athens is the rebels. And the force means they're living the perfect way of life as Plato laid it out in a previous dialogue called The Republic. And, it's a really good match. And So much so that people have kind of ripped me off on that, but whatever. But I think that helps. I think when I would tell that story, I think it helps students go, oh, so it's like a made up story. Yeah, you got it. It's a made up story, just like Star Wars.
Yes.
Although there are people saying Star Wars really happened, they're softening us up to let us know the truth.
Yeah, I didn't in the UK like maybe a decade or so back. I think they actually got the Force to be recognized as an official religion. I don't know that they call it the Force, but it's something along those lines based on the Force, and they've officially recognized it as a religion. I believe specifically in the UK. I don't know that it's been anywhere else that they've done it, but yeah, that actually happened.
Oh my God. I don't know why, but that reminds me of there are a couple of states where I think, really and for true, Sasquatch is an endangered species, and if you shoot one, you're guilty of a crime.
I think it's Washington, might be Oregon, but I
if
think it's
if it's
Washington.
Anywhere, it's going to be Washington
exactly.
or Oregon. Yeah,
I've heard that too, which I think is
okay,
pretty entertaining. Also, yeah, good times. Is there anything else you'd like to ask us about while we're all here?
I mean, this is. I won't ask a question, but I'll say this is really great reconnecting with you guys. That you guys remembered me, and not to like report me to the authorities, but actually to invite me onto your podcast. I'm sorry if there were technical issues.
It happens.
Seems to be the case here. We have lousy signal.
Yeah,
but we do what we can. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show. I had a blast, and I have to. I have your email address. I will send you. I forgot to a copy of the discounts for a couple of my books. So people, if you're interested in this stuff, I got 30%, 30% discount directly from the publisher.
Awesome. That's really cool.
So I will do that today.
I'll take advantage of that for sure because there's more books that I want. I have a couple here, but
there you go.
Cool. So, is there anything specific that you're working on or that you'd like to plug before we let you go? Last question. You said you're working on a new book or any other books?
Yeah, that as of. Sure. Well, as of 2019, I actually am now a professor emeritus. So I've taught that for 40 years. So now I'm not teaching anymore, but I'm still writing. So I am currently working on a book on which my publisher, for some reason, will not allow me to name National Parchaeology. But it's the archaeology of national parks and national monuments of great places that you can go to visit. Isn't that a great word? So that actually was supposed to be out already, but because of the pandemic, there were places that I had to wanted to visit, couldn't incorporate it. So we're working on that, and now I'm also working on a popular book for Princeton University Press is doing a series of popularly oriented archaeology books. There's one on the Maya and one on I think the megaliths, and I'm doing North America. So I've got to get going on that, and now my side gig. It's not a side gig, but it's one of my hobbies is I'm a real Sherlock Holmes fan. So I've read all the books, all the stories and books, 4 books and 56 short stories like multiple times. And I've seen all the movies from the 1930s and 40s. And of course the Granada series with Jeremy Brant, it was just fantastic. Let's not even talk about the Sherlock TV show. Benedict Cumberbatch is wonderful, but it's not the original stuff. And so I've actually, this is embarrassing almost to admit, but I've actually written a Sherlock Holmes story, which I'm thinking at some point, just kind of publishing my own self through Amazon, through one of those self-publishing things, just because it's a hell of a lot of fun, and it keeps writing keeps me out of trouble. So those are my projects right now.
That's awesome. Very interesting. I'll be keeping an eye out for that book too. Yeah.
Froze a little bit. There we go.
Chaos happens. All right. Well, we've taken up your time for over an hour, so I'm not going to keep you any longer, but thank you so much for joining us today. I know I had a lot of fun. And yeah, thank you.
Oh,
hope you have a great rest of your day.
Me too.
Had a blast. Thank you so much for inviting me on. And again, everybody should go out and buy copies of Ancient America, 50 Archaeological Sites You Can See for Yourself, or Archaeological Oddities.
I very much agree because I have both of those and they're both great, and I've been using both of them to see a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
Coolio.
So what is next for us then?
next is Stargate SG-1 Season 2, Episode 16.
Wow.
A Matter of Time.
Ooh.
And we've got 1. While attempting to save SG-10 from a black hole, the SG-1 team activates the Stargate and exposes themselves to the hole's gravitational pull.
Oops.
Yes. Or, a black hole swallows the SG-10 team and O'Neill is sent on a rescue mission. But the hole's gravitational pull grows stronger, drawing the Stargate toward it and soon threatening to destroy Earth. Will O'Neill find a way to stop this super destructive force?
I bet he doesn't.
He doesn't. End of series. Again.
And the end, yep.
Time for Atlantis.
Woo!
Don't know.
Anything else?
Yeah, no.
Oh.
No, I was just going to say, Atlantis will just start. We won't have any reason to understand what's going on at all, but that's fine.
Nope.
Yeah.
We'll have no backstory on any characters or anything that we
Nope.
get in SG-1 later on. As always, thanks for listening. Make sure that you subscribe to us on your podcatcher of choice if you haven't already done so that you can get all of our episodes as soon as they are released every Monday. You can also find us on YouTube. Reviews and likes are greatly appreciated to help others find the podcast, and word of mouth is appreciated as well, since that also helps people find the podcast to tell your friends. If you'd like to get in touch with us, and especially if you'd like any of those discounts on Kenny's books, please email us at stargatezing@gmail.com. I won't be posting that to our Twitter feed or any place public, but I will provide those to anybody that emails us. Again, stargatezing@gmail.com. And of course, you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at stargatezing. If you're feeling generous and would like to help support the show and would like access to free donor bonus episodes, such as our outtakes episodes or our Stargate Origins episodes, you can find us on patreon.com/stargatezing. And as always, you can check out our website at stargatezing.space. I'm Mary. You've also been listening to Kathy and Dr. Kenneth Feder, aka Kenny.
I deny anything they've ever said.
And this has been Stargazing. The end. So I'll keep my laptop here.
Okay.